I knew something was wrong the moment he entered the house without even looking at me, with a more closed expression than usual, as if the air around him had suddenly become colder. And then, with a dry movement, he threw a folder on the table and said, without taking his eyes off the watch on his wrist, that he wanted a divorce, as if he was warning me that he would forget to stop by the market, as if it was nothing, as if he wasn't destroying a life, a story, a continuous effort of 3 years to try desperately to be enough. And I was standing there with my mouth dry and my heart racing in my chest. I asked, almost voicelessly, if he was serious, and he just nodded and said that the contract was nearing its end anyway, that there was no reason to prolong something that should never have started, that it was better for everyone. And before I could digest that avalanche, he added that he had found someone again, someone he had never forgotten, someone he thought he had lost forever, but who was now back, ready to rebuild what they had started years ago. And it was only then that I realized, when he mentioned that she had returned to the country, that the person was my sister, the same sister who had disappeared from the map weeks before their wedding, leaving everyone in shock and forcing our families to push me down the aisle in her place. And even with the humiliation of being a substitute, even with the pain of loving a man who didn't want me, I accepted, because he was my dream, my first love, the silent obsession of my youth. And I clung to the idea that if I was a good wife, if I was always available, if I knew him better than anyone, maybe one day he would look at me differently. Maybe he would love me, but he never tried to disguise his contempt. He never bothered to hide the fact that he'd only agreed to the marriage out of family obligation. And on the wedding night, while I was waiting for a caress, he just opened a folder and presented me with the 3-year contract, saying that at the end of that period, our marriage would be automatically dissolved unless we both agreed to continue. But he'd already made it clear that there would be no such decision, that it was an agreement with an expiration date. And yet I stayed, because the heart is stupid, stubborn and insists where it doesn't belong. And over the next few years, I did everything. I took care of his migraine attacks. I learned special recipes because of his sensitive stomach. I bought the most expensive medicines without asking for reimbursement. I learned acupuncture. I massaged his shoulders after tense meetings, and he barely said thank you. But I kept trying, like someone who plants flowers in a desert, hoping that one drop of rain will change everything. And when I found out I was pregnant, my first reaction was to smile, to think that this child could be the link that would unite us, that maybe he would change. But when I told him, he looked at me like I was a traitor and said dryly that it was impossible, because he had had a vasectomy before the wedding, and that if this child existed, it certainly wasn't his. And before I could defend my honor, he pushed the divorce papers towards me and said that if I signed them without causing any problems, he would still give me a generous financial compensation, as if I were expired goods being returned with a bonus for having lasted longer than expected. And there, with my world falling apart, my soul shattered, and my heart bleeding, I realized that no matter how much I proved it, no matter what I said, he would never trust me, because he had never loved me. And when my mother called, excited, saying that my sister was back and that we should all have dinner together, the knot in my throat tightened even more, and I understood that the plan was simple. Take me out of the picture and reposition the original piece in the place she had, left vacant, as if I had never existed. And yet I went to dinner, dressed up, did a nice haircut, put on perfume, forced myself to smile, because I knew it wasn't the moment to fall, it was the moment to observe. And when I saw them walk in together, hand in hand, I felt a chill, because she, although more downcast, was still everything I never managed to be in his eyes. And even though my belly was already protruding, I walked up to them, hugged him in front of her, called him love, held his arm affectionately, and when I realized that she was getting tense, I kept up the act, dragged him into the bedroom, closed the door, and confronted him. And when he tried to let go, I said firmly that he was my husband, and that I had the right to touch him, to be with him, to say what I thought. And he, his face contorted with rage, said that I was losing my mind, that it didn't make sense, that he had never promised me anything. And I then asked him if he was sure about the vasectomy, if the doctor couldn't have made a mistake, if he really believed that I was capable of cheating, and he laughed with contempt, saying that I was too predictable for that. And yet, I didn't accept the possibility of being a father. And later, during dinner, when I ordered a dish that he liked, and suggested that I pick it up at the market further away, just to annoy him. I saw in his eyes the restlessness of someone who is beginning to doubt their own conviction. And the next day, I didn't make any coffee. I didn't fix anything. And when he complained, I pretended not to hear and went to take care of myself, went to a spa, took the day to breathe, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I felt free. And when his assistant called asking me to bring lunch, saying that he wasn't eating anything, I just said that. And then strange messages started arriving, photos sent by mistake by my sister, showing him distracted with meaningless captions. And I realized that they were trying to provoke me, to destabilize me, perhaps hoping that I would freak out. But what they achieved was the opposite. They made me stronger, more determined, and when I finally signed the divorce papers, I did it with firm hands, with a straight face, without crying, without asking for anything, and I walked away, went to live in another city, got a modest job in a neighborhood bookstore. I saved every penny, prepared everything with care for the arrival of my son, and when he was born, I found myself facing the greatest love I've ever felt. A clean, pure love without conditions. And it was at that moment that Ricardo appeared, not as a savior, but as a man who also had scars, who also knew the bitter taste of disappointment, and who never asked me about the past, just held out his hand and walked beside me, and our bond grew little by little, between diapers, bottles, shy laughter, and long conversations, until, without realizing it, we were already a family. And my son, by calling him Dad, sealed what the blood didn't demand, but the heart recognized, and years later, when I met Tomas again at a gala event, and saw his face turn pale when he saw the boy, who looked so much like him, calling another, "Man, Daddy," I understood that fate had done its job, and when I approached him and said, with all the calm in the world, that this was the son he had rejected, who was now in good hands, I saw in his eyes the reflection of regret that it was too late, and he tried to come to me afterwards, tried to talk, to ask for forgiveness, but I listened only to tell him that now he was just a stranger, that my son already had a father, and that father was Ricardo, and he left with his shoulders bowed. Defeated, and over time his life fell apart. His company sank. His public image deteriorated. His reputation was swallowed up by scandals. And Jimena disappeared, abandoning him when the money ran out. And I, on the other hand, flourished, opened my art gallery, watched my son grow up with joy, was loved like never before. And when he asked me why he didn't have another father, I heard Ricardo say, smiling, that fate had given him the best. And in that instant, I knew it had all been worth it. That the pain, the humiliation, the abandonment were just stepping stones to something greater, truer, more mine. And even when I received a letter from Tomas years later, asking for forgiveness, saying that he was alone, broken, sorry, I just kept the letter without replying, because there was nothing more to be said. And the greatest answer I could give was there, in the full life I have built, in the peace that inhabits my home, in my son's light laughter, in Ricardo's warm embrace, in the mirror where I finally see someone who has survived the shipwreck and learned to swim to the other shore,